Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to How to Make a Scene, our ongoing series on Lumpen Radio and at Co-Prosperity. I'm Brandon Alvendia, thrilled to continue this journey exploring the artist-run cultural ecosystems of the 1980s, 90s, and today in Chicago. How to Make a Scene is a collaborative effort between the Public Media Institute, the parent not-for-profit of Lumpen Radio, and Co-Prosperity and MDW, a coalition of Midwestern artist organizations. The series is supported by the Terra Foundation for American Art as part of the citywide Art Design Chicago initiative. Our aim is to connect veteran artists organizers with those working today through intimate events at Co-Prosperity, broadcasts on Lumpen Radio, and live streams on LumpenTV. Through the end of the year, we'll continue to explore Chicago's deep artist-run history of alternative gallery spaces, independent publications, and socially engaged collectives. Our discussions have been led by moderators who have engaged with artists who have built experimental infrastructures of support for themselves and their peers. These gatherings are platforms for sharing generational knowledge, informal oral histories, and strategizing for future impact. Today's event is the second part of the two-part presentation and is hosted by members of Act Street and friends, including Tim Andrews, Mary Patten, Samuel Piazza, Rebecca Wolfram, and Greg Ruffing, who will share materials from the Act Street archive. In their words, for this iteration of How to Make a Scene, we will create a kind of metaphorical seance, what we call more tales of the subversive acts. This two-part transmission will conjure the spirit of Michael Piazza, Bertha Husband, and Elysam Escobar through their words, their music, and their art making, while we also summon the bodies, hearts, and minds of Act Street survivors, its children, its collaborators, and memory keepers, that is, ourselves.
Say, Uncle, none of the present government would turn around and say, all right, if they say, Uncle,
is to remove the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. Is that your goal?
Well, remove it in the sense of
X Street Arena was a gathering space, a gallery, an event center, and a hub of intersecting cultures and people located in Logan Square in Chicago during the mid-1980s. X Street was co-founded by Bertha Husband, James Kenline, Mary Jo Marchnight, Laura Piazza, Michael Piazza, Rebecca Wolfram, and Tim Andrews. Soon after, political prisoner and painter Elizam Escobar joined the collective. Escobar had been arrested in 1980 for seditious conspiracy, conspiring to overthrow the US government, because of his affiliation with the FALN, a clandestine group that advocated for the independence of Puerto Rico.
X Street flourished from 1985 till 1989 when they lost their lease, but then continued as a placeless entity into the 1990s, generating other collaborations, publications, as well as exhibiting individually. Working on the periphery of the art world and the edges of social movements, they took political and aesthetic risks while generating complex dialogues about art's relationship to political urgency. Among the urgencies that propelled X Street into being was the United States intervention into Central America and the Caribbean in the early 1980s. X Street emerged in part from Artists' Call, the national response network formed to expose and fight the arming and funding of the Contras in Nicaragua and U.S. support of the bloody dictatorship in El Salvador. In 1984, Husband, Marchnight, Wolfram, and Michael and Laura Piazza mounted an Artists' Call exhibition at NAB Gallery in Chicago, part of a citywide series of shows, including events at Artemisia and the Puerto Rican Cultural Center.
X Street's home was a 12,000 square foot semi-raw space in the former Goldblatt's building in Logan Square. It was also the home and studio space of several collective members. X Street was independent and autonomous from the art world, but they were also interlopers, as in their Medusa collective performance reading of Valerie Solanas' Scum Manifesto at Randolph Street Gallery. Besides numerous salon-style exhibitions, X Street hosted music, poetry, performance events, dinners and feasts, published books and journals, and opened the space to groups working in solidarity with Nicaragua, Puerto Rico, Guatemala, Ireland, Palestine, and other movements for sovereignty and self-determination. Other programming included mail art and graffiti shows, events and exhibitions by and for women and queer people such as Mad Love, L'Amour Fou, and Cabaret Genet. And their annual Robert Burns dinners featured bagpipes, haggis, a sheep's head, and a chamber music ensemble.
In response to political crises and demands, X Street produced a more complicated response than Agitprop with its familiar tools of outrage, unmasking, and critique. The X Street sensibility was a mix of surrealism, anarchism, autonomous Marxism, feminism, solidarity with national liberation struggles and working class rebellions, and queer life and thought. They had a predilection for Kafka. There is infinite hope, but not for us. Bert Husband, in her essay for the Artists' Call catalog, quotes John Berger's A Painter of Our Time. There are three ways to be an artist: throwing stones, making agitprop, and making art at the behest of no one. X Street artists struggled mightily against the mandate that artists should be sign painters for the revolution, while instead offering sharp and witty political expressions. X Street and its various afterlives were and are experiments in art, in politics, and in living. In their own words,
We reject a world in which education and information are touted as the answers to all our problems, while in reality they are seen as other mechanisms to intimidate and control. We also reject an art which panders either to the investment-minded art collector and careerist art maker, or the narrowly propagandist left. Instead, we desire to indulge ourselves in such forbidden activities as dreaming and conversation, principled action and determined inaction. From these things, real art, that strange fruit of mysterious intuitions and indefinable connections, may, we hope, be encouraged to participate in our futures.
Before the last attack. The hills are black with dew and simple mosses. We all await the light of careful dawn. Dora Maria, heavy with the weariness of determined sinners, of priests whose catechism has taken on unseemly shadows, or of new mothers staring into the chubby pools of graceless rump, wishes for a narrow road but leading home. There, behind the open windows of some future risk, she would like to find a book of poems in a still room, music entering her head like clever insects. Time to slide along a while to death. A poem by Mary Jo Marchnight. Dora Maria Tellez is a Nicaraguan historian and social rights activist. As a young university medical student in the 1970s, Tellez was recruited by the Sandinista National Liberation Front, the FSLN, and became a comandante in the revolution that ousted the Somoza dictatorship of 1979.
Thus says Ubico of Guatemala, smoking a cigarette.
Ladies first, cracks in the pavement. We North Americans are accustomed to studying the history of art as through taking place outside the rest of life, when in actuality, this approach is the result of calculated actions that caused depoliticization of artists during World War II, the Cold War, and the McCarthy era. Hence, New York championed as the world's center of art, projecting the modern artist as apolitical, overchoiced, confused, and equating this anxiety with freedom. This was American International forced down the throats of the world. Yet here we are, self-censored for fear of losing our place in line, making sure we stay within the bounds of acceptable consumer dissidence. Such was the case for the shakeup at Art Forum magazine in 1976 after articles appeared by Carol Duncan and Eva Cockcroft, who attempted to address the issues of artists' relations to the social and political world. Cockcroft stated, "To understand why a particular art movement becomes successful under a given set of historical circumstances requires an examination of the specifics of patronage and the ideological needs of the powerful." For fear of losing advertisers, editor Max Kozloff and others were eventually replaced, returning the magazine back towards Serge Guibro as a less dangerous formalism. All of this seems to be part of what Joel Colville refers to in An Age of Desire as the ruling class, cultural colonization of the individual through mass culture, a sort of forced fascism. To sum up the sorry state of American culture, Ernesto Cardenal, Minister of Culture in Nicaragua, stated to UNESCO in 1982, "If the Wall Street Journal says the United States has made a business of its culture, we could say that our revolution is our culture and our culture is revolution. The people of Nicaragua will defend their borders when the time comes. In the meantime, they will continue to explore their newly awakened culture, which has been denied them for centuries. This is why Nicaraguan culture is eminently that of protest, political songs, popular street theater, which was agitational, at times clandestine," states Cardinal. Alan Bolt, theater officer of the Nicaraguan Ministry of Culture, agrees that we must put in our hands the theater as a gun, as a weapon to free ourselves from imperialism. Excerpts from Cracks in the Pavement by Michael Piazza, part of the opening address of Artist Call 1984.
From a bird's eye view, we can observe a new chaos in the art world, a great confusion in the artistic values, and a sickening picture of the art market. Artists, dealers, gallery owners, museums, auction houses, collectors, etc., all dancing to the tune of big capital, where art becomes a piece of property to be enjoyed not only for its aesthetic or emotional value, but for its borrowing power. The artist becomes a servile factory that produces images, no longer for the old illusion of art for art's sake, but in the spirit of art for money's sake. The avant-garde is dead. The market made it harmless and useless. And we, who may still have something of the avant-gardist in us, would like to make of our works something useless to that same market. We would like that our work would have something which they couldn't use. Maybe that something would be us, because we know that the old fox has been able to convert everything into a commodity, because perhaps there is still a great work of art to realize, the destruction of the market. It's true, our pretensions may seem fantastic and unreal, but our century has proved that reality is much more fantastic than our imagination, that the imagination is also a political weapon, and that the struggle is also between one fiction and another fiction. Let's then be daring, as our songs are daring, as our poems, as our images. Let's walk too beside the gravediggers for the well-being of art and humanity. Excerpts from Elizam Escobar's writing in the catalog for his exhibition, Art as an Act of Liberation. Jan Sussler, Elizam's friend and lawyer, asked Act Street in 1985 to organize an exhibition of the many paintings Elizam had made since he'd been incarcerated. Along with various collaborators, Act Street mounted the exhibition Art as an Act of Liberation in 1986. The exhibition then traveled nationally and internationally. One of the immediate and unforeseen impacts was that Elizam was disappeared from the Federal Correction Institute in Oxford, Wisconsin, to the federal penal colony in Reno, Oklahoma. The prison also took away Elizam's brushes and paints, making it impossible for him to work. An international campaign was launched and successfully put pressure on the Bureau of Prisons to restore his art materials.
So next we're going to show you a film made by Bea Santiago Munoz, an artist who lives in Puerto Rico and has spent a long time in Chicago. Bea made the film in 2013 with Elizam, who you'll see and hear in it. Elizam writes in his anti-diarios, anti-diaries, de prisión, anti-diaries made in prison. Another curious element is that it seemed that I was seeing images from the dreams I had that afternoon, but these images were appearing from end to beginning like a film reel running backwards. I also couldn't properly situate them. So prisoner cinema.
¿No? 3 de marzo de 1988, jueves tarde. De momento descubro que mi pie izquierdo lleva mi chancleta al revés. O sea, que al levantarme para cerrar la ventana, mi pie izquierdo se introdujo por el frente de la chancleta en vez de meterse por atrás. El pie izquierdo cometió un error. Cuando el pensamiento registró este evento, los ojos, al pedido del pensamiento, miraron hacia abajo para denunciar el error y restablecer el orden. Inevitablemente, yo he tenido que reírme y el pensamiento, en cuestión de segundos, ha elaborado un sinnúmero de teorías y analogías de este evento con eventos más significativos de la conducta del ser humano. Hace unos minutos que desperté de un sueño en donde las ideas éticos, morales, ideológicas, culturales del Partido Laboral Progresista me perseguían como un juez ideológico. Y yo trataba de luchar y justificar mis ideas. Lo de la chancleta vino a funcionar como una imagen entre el libro que leo y el sueño. La situación es la siguiente. El pie cometió un error y como error la cosa produce risa. Sin embargo, supongamos que un individuo decide conscientemente ponerse una chancleta del lado frontal. Por supuesto causaría risa, pero a la vez no se podría llamar esta decisión un error. Más bien, sería una forma de usar un objeto llamado chancleta.
Wednesday, March 16th, 1988. The question of Tuesday, March 8th was answered today. The small stairway job lasted 5 days. They eliminated 3 workers and gave more work to the remaining 4. I now have the job I had before. The trash, the clothes, and the sheets. Getting the materials, plus the small stairway, the guard's office, the closet, and the card playing room. There are no alternatives. If Freud was right, then this should favor my writing, as tensions will rise again. Monday, March 21st, 1988. 51 years since the Ponce Massacre.
28 de marzo 1988. El mundo es un abanico que se abre y se cierra, y hoy pienso que sería ridículo que mañana me quedase durmiendo eternamente cuando hay tanto por hacer. Afuera, lluvia, viento, un tornado a la Oklahoma. La ventana de mi cuarto se abre con el viento. El cristal está roto, solo que el tape aguanta los pedazos. De romperse el cristal esta noche, la situación sería incómoda. 7 de abril 1988. Sería bueno decir que el pensamiento ha estado tan ocupado en compartir su soledad que no ha escrito nada sobre él mismo. Pero sí ha habido bochinches de presos que lo han ocupado en momentos de su ir y venir. O sea, habladurías de tipo trivial y cuya causa es la inestabilidad mental y de carácter de la mayoría en las prisiones. Pero también es parte de la lucha de clases al nivel de los zombies. Pendejadas, verdaderamente.
April 24th, 1988. In a few moments she will come. We had a good symposium with the participation of the compañero Jerónimo Prat, who is here passing through and who I met last Wednesday. Just finished writing and they announced she's here. April 25th, 1988. We have a Penelope who didn't know her mythical name, an Odysseus that crosses the Atlantic on foot, who asks, what is a decade compared to just one moment of her gaze? Penelope exists in every corner of this world, but mine is special, not only because she is mine, but because through her I know the others. April 29th, 1988. Being ahead is getting there first, but without knowing how one got there. Then the mind understands the need for the road of return, a reverse road towards the origin. Only then do you begin to understand your success or failure. Let a mental map be made of this, and you'll see the eternal transformation of things. Let a prank be made out of this, and you'll see the funny side of existence. Let a goal or a project be made of this, and you will understand the failure of humanity. Consumed by the battle between sadness and joy, the melancholy that takes over in the moments when I'm supposed to be cheerful, this morning on the phone with her, knowing, or better said, intuiting that there is something that has happened that has changed things between us, an uneasiness that troubles me deep inside, something she hasn't said that's been around for weeks. The symptoms are there, and yet everything seems the same or better. Maybe they're symptoms created by my imagination and that prison paranoia. And this is only part of what happens inside the volcano, that internal assembly that digests and argues every single idea, opinion, fear, decision that takes place inside of me. And what do? I only move my body from here to there. I park it, feed it, bathe it, comb it, and groom it. I lay it down and get it up. I educate it, I protect it, I tire it, and I demand from it things that maybe I shouldn't. But it's been 8 years since sanctity was assumed. A saint? Yes, a materialistic, dialectic, ironic Saint Elizam of the prisons that finds his reality and concupiscence in art and poetry. A paradoxical saint that sometimes has to masturbate so the pipes can deflate. May 1st, 1988, International Workers' Day, a day for marching through the streets of imperialism. Tough day here in prison, emotionalisms and absurdities. But also, in the end, compassion. I think I'm a sentimental. I am a Nietzsche holding on to the neck of the battered horse, or the drunk young man that gives his coat to the poor bastard on the corner of 104 and Columbus Avenue, or the guy that throws himself from the top of Riverside Drive Hill and tumbles down all the way to the Hudson River and then cries inconsolably. I am Nietzsche telling the old woman to keep her faith in God. They're metaphoric allusions, of course. None of that happens here. But if I try to be tough with the fellows, I also remember their world of toughness. I take pity, and then when a moment of deep expression arises, I am moved. Sunday is consuming itself. It's 11:37 p.m. on my watch of just 3 or 4 days. It means that in less than half an hour, Sunday, May 1st, 1988, will no longer be. Never again will there be a Sunday like this. What a joy for the unhappy. How sad for those who lived joyful moments today. That something can never again be is moving. I leave you behind. Sunday, May 1st, 1988. 17 minutes of life. Don't let time go by, beautiful Oklahoma Sunday. Let the trumpets be heard and the ships sound their sirens. Proletarian Sunday, you are being spit on the face. Goodbye, until never again. May 2nd, 1988, morning 9:05 a.m. My brain has sent a sudden thought. You must distrust the clock. You have to be suspicious of the Greeks when they come with their gifts. The Trojan horse inside a clock. It is ironic that Odysseus was the one who came up with the wooden horse idea and that today he is my painting of paranoia. My mind suspects there's something behind my mind. June 22nd, Tuesday, late. I could have died yesterday, but I have settled with going forward. For them, my 4 horsemen of my anti-apocalypse. But let's not deny it, the body is a martyr. How much it endures, poor thing. It's like a super-loaded battery that can't use its energy. And my eyes that contain in themselves my annoyance with everything here. The indifference towards this landscape, lost somewhere in space and time, except here. There's so much to do, and yet it's completely possible to lay down and think about nothing, to die of sadness in a bed, just like that. Die because there's so much to do that the sole image of this idea paralyzes me. September 3rd, night. I have forgotten it was September. I am worse than the clock. That's why I have to keep the mind under scrutiny. Or maybe the other way around. If this wasn't the case, then I would be a completely free man. September 19th, 1988. Moses said to the Lord, "O Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." Of course, all this is being written by Moses as if it wasn't him, as if he was a character who has nothing to do with a writer. But somehow, Moses is like Plato, in the same way that Lot's woman is like Eurydice, Orpheus' wife. And I have too clumsy and sore writing to be able to talk about yesterday and the day before, in the literal and rigorous sense of these words. But my joy is brimming outside of writing, because she is the writer's woman, even though she says she doesn't feel the same as the one behind the one who writes. And I, a Moses that understands Joseph's Egyptian wailing, thinks that the exchange value, the equivalence, is no good here. I better ask for the complement of the other. She is my desire of the contrary, a suspended fact held up in the movement of love. And if I tell her she is the moon, she understands me. And if I talk to her through my eyes, because we are being spied on by the sons of Israel, she understands me. And a simultaneous smile reveals one another. It unites us in the great abyss that separates us momentarily. September 20th, 1988. Yesterday I spoke with the son and the mother of the son. They were in Greece. After having a nice conversation with both, in the 3rd round, the mother accused me, in the anticlimax, of being naive, for my stand on not acknowledging the jurisdiction of the Yankee courts, of not wanting to get out of prison, while the son needs his father. These are obviously two political and two world visions that do not meet. Common sense, common on-sense, that distance from social and political struggles demands commitments with the reality of the quotidian, where the quotidian is a mirage called ulterior reality. The politics of family as the logic of the state. There's projection, somehow. There's also a way of worrying, of responsibility, of reality principle, of good intentions, etc. I am left on the other side with those who, like me, are in awe of the alienation caused by a long period of status quo as a golden life and principle of existence, in spite of the fact that there was before a political fighter for social change. October 30th, 1988. Accelerated end of year and tense like a scorpion inside my heart. I read and I read in time. The time of definite sadness is coming for me. I feel it. But I also feel a distant and cold heart. Arachne throws me one of her webs. However, it is me who saves the spiders who weave them myself.
Tomorrow, I'll write a letter to my congressman and send a bouquet to my mother, who is dying, having performed her last miracle, planned her last and most clever disguise, growing smaller to defy gravity made by others. A careful insinuation of will touched by grace. Oh, she is an ordinary woman who is taller than some, with black hair, thick hair. in a rush and a long stride to take her not along but down, not making headway but a black hole to join the other disappeared, reddened by a bloodiness too close to salvation to be aware of its own minor defeats, which is reason enough to mail that letter to the congressman, to keep in touch with the democratic process, having somehow misplaced all of the other processes in life, receiving, as I know I will, a letter stamped as if by my own hand, and in terms as vague as tea leaves, but a reply I shall receive, while I may send flowers from Africa daily, but my mother will not write.
It's an excerpt from the Medusa Collective. Maybe this should be a shout, a demand, and a call to desert, not to pretend any longer, but to genuinely desert the heterosexual norm. But let us be specific and state that we demand this not generally to all straights at this time, but to those who claim to be progressives, leftists, anti-imperialists, anti-racists, and revolutionaries, because their persistent clinging to heterosexuality has meant 20 years of counter-revolution. For gays, there's always been two major and haunting questions. Why, in a society that enforces heterosexuality so powerfully and so successfully, are some of us gay? And why do they hate us so much? In the 20 years since Stonewall, there have been a variety of answers to these questions, but in the main, there is a bobbing back and forth between two positions. First, that all people are really gay, however latent or repressed, and second, that only a chosen few are gay, and that these chosen few need to demand their equal rights along with the majority. This latter position has led gays to involve themselves in reformist politics, while the straight left infiltrates these gay formations in an attempt to co-opt energy, commitment, and enthusiasm away from being gay into being a cheerless and eager flunky for a future most notable for the absence of ourselves. So perhaps it is time for a return to support for the first postulate. Everyone is really gay, for it is only this that can give us an acceptable answer to the question, why do they hate us? Within the fear and loathing of the heterosexual norm lurks desire. Their wish to kill and humiliate, often carried out, is a hatred of something they fear in themselves. Those are excerpts from Medusa Collectives, which is Bertha Husband and Mary Jo Marchnight. Medusa Collective's L'amour fou, Art and the Resistance of the, quote, lesser struggle against the murder by the left, part of Mad Love 3 exhibition of works by gay and lesbian artists, June '88.
And the woman smells the familiar stench of opportunism. She thinks she should be careful. Like all colonized peoples, she has learned the art of dissembling. Fearing to tip her hand, she thanks him for his good words, but in truth, she doesn't trust a revelation that comes at the end of a book that starts with the patriarchal word and Eve eating the apple of knowledge. The man wanted a return to paradise. He wanted a return to a time of no death. He had abused, destroyed life, the sea, the earth, the air, the sky, and now he desired to conquer death. But there are many different utopias. Each one of the people who are sitting and facing the brick wall sees something else on the other side. And St. John smiled the smile of one in control who knows all. And the woman smiles the secret smile of a sweeter reality. and she thinks the woman's secret revelation. That's an excerpt from Bertha Husband's essay, The Song of an Apocalyptic Army of Lovers, in the catalog for the exhibition Subversive Acts, Myths and Truths of the Apocalypse.
The following is a letter to Resist, a small foundation supporting social justice and liberation movements in response to their rejection of Act Street Arena's application for funding. Dear staff at Resist, this is in response to your letter of March 22nd and is a reply to the concerns expressed. Our audience, we have a collaborator membership of 50. In the last couple of months, they have contributed over $1,000 to us out of their pockets when we had an emergency need. They are a part of our audience and also real participants in what we do. They are artists and musicians and poets who are generally also politically aware. We have a special connection to the Latino community who constitute a large percentage of our audience for all shows. When no one in Chicago seemed to have heard of International Women's Day, celebrating instead a euphemism called Women's History Month, we instituted an International Women's Day exhibition with events and a brochure that included a herstory of its inception. We have maintained the only gallery exhibition of work by gay and lesbian artists during Gay Pride Week. These events are not services, however, they arise out of the real connections of the collective to those communities. The crossing of boundaries of people attending the exhibitions and events has always interested us. We were particularly pleased when the youths we met during our graffiti show came to the International Women's Day event. These then are the people we reach through proselytizing for the church, not for the artists.
Pronouns. The second comment made in your letter strikes us as not a serious one, and one that either covers up other objections to us that you might not like to announce, or one that could only be made by someone with an antiquated position on feminist linguistics and nothing much else on her mind. After all, if you remember, the debate on he, she includes such arguments as that she, her is in general usage among gay men, proving that it does not refer to a woman necessarily, but to a feminine or gender-specific attitude, which many women reject. Here at the gallery, we are aware of the ideals of progressive language, but only 2 of us have come out of the women's liberation workshops and rap sessions that would have drummed those lessons into our heads for all time, and so must rely on an imperfect training. We are also of the opinion that the importance of such obvious manifestations of freedom as alternative pronoun usage and the eternal debate over who should do the housework may be diminished by the ease with which they can be accommodated by a sexist society without touching the reality of women's oppression. To take one example, the use of Ms. instead of Miss or Mrs., widely used among professionals and now completely acceptable everywhere, has not meant that women receive equal pay or are otherwise given equal status in any area. To hold such details as central is surely an error in perspective. The other obvious point is that since you have not said where the offensive pronoun came from in our brochure, and since our brochures are replete with uncensored statements from well and lesser-known painters, poets, and other riffraff, we must not necessarily assume it was a slip of our own tongue in print.
Gladly, we are not in desperate need of the mean-spirited and uncharitable left for our welfare. We recently gave up our 2-year battle to get tax-exempt status from the federal government, which seems to feel that an art space may incorporate a resistance to illegitimate authority. The city of Chicago continues to give us some grant aid, although we fail to comply with the terms and do not always fill out the applications. But we occupy a position of some respect due to the quality and the integrity of the programs and the exhibitions we hold. Lastly, it occurs to us that the bourgeois left denies the primacy of art and culture exactly in the way that the capitalist bourgeoisie does. The left hates art, distrusts it, sees artists as bourgeois individualists who should be made useful, as banner painters and poster makers and general flunkies. The state likes to trot art around as a commodity and an investment and make fools of the artists themselves. There isn't much to choose. We believe that Baudrillard's dictum, death is not enough, it is also necessary to disappear, could refer to the need for a people to maintain their culture, their art and music and language, as well as their life, if they are not to cease to exist as a people. And we can't help believing that individual artwork is not an unsocial activity, but a truly human and indispensable affair. The experience of Nicaragua has strengthened that belief and proven also that it is possible for some to be both artist and revolutionary. In the end, maybe it is even necessary.
When the orchestra picked me up, I'd been on the road for quite a while. There were the usual pieces: piccolo, gigolo, a few small persuasions, a heartbeat, and some double dealing. They said they needed another tin whistle. I needed a new risk. They played a sort of urban angst music, full of the subtleties of eternal surveillance. We performed in any old corner: basement, a balcony, a roof, a field, once even a graveyard. Sometimes a small crowd gathered. A child might stare at us, put his tongue out. A granny or granddad might arrive in a wheelchair and burst into tears. There was always something.
Y sueño, mira la luna, pez de plata, traedla a un anzuelo, prendida. Que aduerme y hechiza, es la negra que canta, es la negra que canta, mira la luna, pez de plata, traedla a un anzuelo, prendida, es la negra que canta, es la negra que canta, mira la luna, pez de plata, venid hermanos al balele, la selva entera está rugiendo, esta es la noche de
We arrived at the gate of an imposing edifice. Leaning slightly in the sun, its windows were glazed so that they dazzled but could not be seen through. Guards with weapons walked along a watchtower. It seemed to me from where I looked that they were wooden soldiers with wooden guns, but I could have been mistaken. Our conductor and 2 of the other musicians went up to the guard. They spoke for a while, the conductor gesticulating wildly from time to time, while the rest of us stood in the sun, shifting nervously from one foot to the other. What exactly is going on? I finally asked the violinist. One of our musicians is inside, and we'd like to have him join us again, she said with a patient smile, as though she were speaking to an inmate of another kind of institution. Now, this place was obviously a prison. The musician was undoubtedly a prisoner and was hardly going to be allowed out to play music with us. In fact, we might find ourselves joining him if we weren't careful. So here I was, having hitched myself to this strange band of traveling weirdos, high and dry in a foreign and vaguely dangerous town, hanging around a prison yard while the guard was being convinced he should allow one of his prisoners out. I watched for my chance, and while they talked to each other, their attention fixed on the conductor and his loony dialogue with the guard, I skidded off and went back to wait for them in town. We came to a small, dusty, vacant little town called Lenore about midnight and checked into one of the empty motels along the highway. Just as I was amusing myself with enough 3-star whiskey to open my own motel, I heard a tremendous hollering, banging on the door all along the corridor. In the hall, I was met by a slim, dark, and handsome wooden soldier with a couple of close-pin friends, who immediately began to frisk me. In search, they said, of a sharp and deadly instrument of destruction. This instrument of destruction had been used on someone this very night, and in this very motel. Who was stabbed, I asked, feigning interest. Either someone you knew or someone you didn't, came the irrefutable and irritating reply. Our conductor, pointing out the window with his cherrywood baton as we flew along, shouted that we had an important gig in an abandoned sculpture studio. I restrained myself from asking why such a place would be abandoned, knowing that art has its own reasons for appearing and then for disappearing. Perhaps the students had discovered leaking asbestos in the heating pipes, or squirrels in the coffee pot. The place was indeed empty of all life but what the French call nature morte. But we proceeded to tune up and rattle the plaster with a jaunty little Russian roulette we'd recently rehearsed, and a roundabout of impeccable precision if marginal worth. The sculptures thus entertained, it was proposed that we set off for a swim, the flutist daring us each individually to match him in an aquatic two-step perfected by Houdini in his last years. I headed for the nearest bar. I felt it was time to hit out on my own again. There's a limit to how many adventures in a row a person really wants. I bid them all an affectionate farewell and hitched a lift from an itinerant arms dealer going in the opposite direction. Unfortunately, the guy wasn't going very far, and as I stood by the side of the road, waiting for another lift, there comes the orchestra, riding along, some kind of float with balloons and even a kite, flying like a mast, and playing for all they're worth. They smiled and waved at me, and I noticed they'd picked up some other guy along the way, too. I had to hand it to them, the way they could get folks to join their crazy band. But he looked to be as nutty as they were, standing back in the penumbra, a funny mask on his face, and a guitar hanging limply by his side. Probably not a musician at all, I thought. They should be more careful who they picked up.
Just to wrap up a little bit of context about this film, so it includes, as you may have guessed, scenes from a trip to Oklahoma to visit Elizam in prison, where the four painters, under close surveillance by bemused prison guards, planned an exhibit. The three unincarcerated artists filmed surreptitious shots of the prison on the way out, and Mary Jo is the narrator. And so in talking to Rebecca, a question that often comes up is, how did you all decide which one went mad, which one died, which one discovered magic, and which one emerged in peace? That answer apparently is lost in the mists of time.
Overcast eclipse. It was a perfectly clear night in August, I think when the last lunar eclipse happened over Chicago. That was in 1989. We had gathered on the roof outside of Act Street Arena, which was on the top floor of the old Goldblatt's building on Milwaukee, Diversey, and Kimball Avenues. Act Street was closing and we were to move out. Drinking from the bottle, we watched as the moon appeared to be a faint, ruddy bubble over the city skyline. I know we were all burned out from 4 years of running an artist space. It was time to move on. Anyway, our lease was up. The owners misjudged the gentrification trajectory. What had motivated us all to move in together to set up this arena in the first place? We all shared a political commitment and vision that art should not be separate from everyday life, that art should look for subversions, which raised the possibility of undoing the prevailing dominant ideology, that many artists, activists who were excluded from more mainstream venues needed a place to congregate. We desired to be on the margins where questions could be raised and imagined possibilities could emerge. From 1985 to 1989, we established links with artists in Nicaragua, including cultural exchange exhibits. We held annual exhibits for International Women's Day, Gay and Lesbian Pride Week. Artists called against U.S. intervention in Central America, the Caribbean, and a citywide graffiti art exhibition. We also welcomed groups at odds with policies of the U.S. government. On one particular Saturday, for example, Case Chile conducted a morning strategy session prior to the plebiscite to oust dictator Pinochet from power. In the evening, there was a Palestinian group meeting which overlapped with a Northern Irish Aid event. This blurring of artistic intent could be why we never approved for the 501c non-for-profit status. The importance at that time, I feel, was to expand the myriad of cultural options available as resistance to the closed dominant culture in hopes of further exploration by more and more people in the future. All in all, Act Street Arena must have appeared too political for the art world and too weird for the politicals. We are interested in formulating a politically engaged art where the message is not overt, one that borders on the poetic as opposed to the didactic. The immediacy of specific political models over art practice predetermines the outcome, in essence, an imposition. We experienced Act Street as a place in which guests were invited to collaborate and explore notions of liberation, however momentary. Excerpts from the essay, Overcast Eclipse by Michael Piazza, written for an exhibition about Act Street Arena at Temporary Services in 1999.
Those four white walls, fame and fortune if you repress and police your imagination, but also beware the endless meetings of the left, as they are death to the imagination. On the one hand, you will trade in your truth to make empty, fashionable consumer objects, and on the other, you will trade it in for the opportunity to make a leaflet they will tell you is art. There is a commonly held idea, which I would dispute, that an artist is someone with drawing and painting skills, and therefore, her function as a member of the anti-imperialist movement is to illustrate slogans, literally. Every human being has an imagination, but an artist is someone who is impelled to constantly play with that imagination, Art is not a 9-to-5 painting production, imitation wage slavery, but a 24-hour-a-day openness to an image, a dream, a coincidence, or an idea. The process of art is mysterious. It comes by playing with materials and forms, by hours of concentration, or by a sudden flash of an idea when the work appears to make itself. Most artists who have been drawn towards revolutionary politics have felt pressured to become sign painters for the revolution. Political activists continue to ask for explanations of works, to ask what relevance or use it has for the class struggle. In a spiritually decadent and bureaucratic society, the individual work of art keeps the imagination alive for a future when it will again be understood. Those are excerpts from Bertha Husband's essay, There is Infinite Hope, but Not for Us.
The Asthmatic Bottle Orchestra.
I hope I didn't butcher that reading too much.
Thank you,
Thank you for
everybody.
coming.
Sorry, anxiety.